In practice, especially in investment banking, an unformatted model is a deal breaker. It's difficult to understand, and it reflects really poorly on you as well as the firm itself, especially if you send it out to a client. Even if you're using a model internally, I sort of mentioned this before in terms of attention to detail, your model can be excellent, but no one will bother looking at it because an unformatted model will just sort of be presumed to be a bad model. And so you really want to be careful with how you format. You really want to be consistent. So this next section is just about laying down some real best practices that you have to follow, especially if you're in investment banking or private equity, these sort of disciplines where that's taken very seriously. So format cells, we had already opened up using Control 1, the format cells dialog box, and just always bear in mind, even if you've forgotten shortcuts, that any cell formatting can be applied via this form. Color coding we touched on, so let's be pretty explicit about the color coding convention that we're going to follow and the one that's typically followed on the street. Hard-coded numbers are blue, formulas are black, links to other worksheets are green, links to other files are red, and links to data providers, we haven't mentioned this yet, but if you're using services like Capital IQ or FactSet or Thomson, where they have their own codes, like we just showed you the Boost codes, well, the data providers that have a lot of really good data, and if you're lucky enough to have a subscription to this, you type equal and then they have their own codes to pull up revenue or pull up EBITDA or whatever. Those should be formatted a little bit differently so that you can distinguish because they're using a server and you need to be online to update the data. You want to know if, for example, you're offline or there's something wrong with the model so you can quickly hone in on, oh, these are the cells that are pulling data from servers. It's good to do. And again, of course, Boost is a major help with this because you can auto color. You don't have to manually go in and look for cells. Without an add-in toolkit like Boost, you have to manually go in and say, oh, this is a hard input, and you have to maintain that consistency. Boost makes it a lot easier to maintain consistent formatting. So custom formatting, a couple of formatting things that let's lay down right off the bat. So if you want to, for example, assign a custom format to a number where you show an X after the number to represent that it's a multiple. So a company's trading at 8.5 times EBITDA, you want to make that an X. The problem with just in Excel, and let me open up Excel again. The problem with just typing in 8.5x, as many of you know, is it loses its integrity as a number. If I multiply this by 5 or 4 or whatever, it'll give me an error. This is not perceived by Excel as a number. So what you want to do when you want to put a multiple in is you want to type it in as a regular number, but you want Excel behind the scenes to custom format it. And so the format here, a really simple way is you type in 0.0, that demonstrates it's a number, as many decimals as you want. Let's say we want 1 decimal place, and then you put an X there, and that just tells Excel, okay, this is still a number. In fact, you can see it's a number inside. But if you, nope, I just undid it. Okay, here we go. But now if you divide, it's still retaining its integrity, or multiply, you're still retaining its integrity as a number. And you can get fairly fancy with it. In fact, this X is so common, having multiple so common, it's part of the Boost shortcut key. So let me actually pull that one up. Control-Shift-1 gets you to the Boost shortcut. Notice it's a little spaced out differently from how we originally did it. And so if you go in and you see what is the syntax for the custom formatting, you see that we didn't just put in 0.0x. There's also this underscore, which creates a space. And the reason this underscore, which basically designates a space bar, you'll then see followed by a semicolon and then parentheses around this. This gets me to the next subject. Basically what this is doing is it wants to line up numbers that are negative with numbers that are positive. So if I copy and paste this, and let's say I turn this negative. By the way, the Boost shortcut to turning something instantly negative is Control-Alt-Shift \. Notice they are aligned. If I had just done this, if I had just typed in 0.0x, if I copy and paste that and turn that into a negative, first it'll just put a minus sign, but I can get rid of that by doing a semicolon and saying, you know what, format negative numbers. Semicolons are basically the separation in Excel's custom syntax between positive numbers and negative numbers. So I want it like this, but you see it won't be aligned. That space, that underscore that you see creates a space for positive numbers that aligns positives and negatives. And you actually see that being used fairly consistently for number formats in Excel. In fact, sort of the default thing here with a negative 1,000 separator, the default one, behind the scenes actually has that underscore in there. And we can sort of test that out. Look, if I do 8.5, convert that to a negative, it's aligned, and that's because even Excel's sort of default behind the scenes native formatting creates those underscores. So knowing, and here it is, so it's just kind of knowing that underscore actually comes in pretty handy, that custom syntax. And so we've drawn out a picture here so you can just generally understand it. And you can see that we've identified, this is the syntax here. Notice that with the negative numbers, you actually have two semicolons. You actually have two semicolons in this custom format. The third semicolon, which sometimes comes in handy, is positive numbers are formatted this way. Negative numbers, notice, are formatted with the parentheses. And then lastly, the number 0 is formatted entirely differently. And so you have the ability to actually format positive numbers, negative numbers, and zeros in different ways. Again, for those that are really curious about this, the Excel crash course goes into a lot of detail about all of these things. I just want to bring up what I think is relevant for our case study today. So you can actually create custom row headers really easily using the custom format cells dialog box using quotes. So X is really an exception to the rule. If you ever type in any letters other than the letter X, you have to use quotes for Excel to sort of retain its integrity as a number. And let me show you what I mean by that. This is really useful with row headers. If I wanted to say, revenue for, let's say, actually, let's do something like this. If I wanted to have a number that says 300 or 30 days, let's say I always wanted this to say 30 days so that I can divide revenue by 30 days. If I wanted to say 30 days, I can actually custom format this. Obviously, let me just go back and just make this clear. If I said 30 days, I can't divide revenue by 30 days. But if I just type in 30, and just like with the X, I said 30 days, 0 days, it actually still won't work because unlike X, you need to put quotations. But then it'll absolutely work. So 30 days, now you'll see it pops up, it shows you that it's okay. And now you have 30 days, then the calculations work. And so it's still a 30 inside, but it shows you that it's a dynamic row header. Let's move on. So generally with formatting, you want to maintain standard formats for numbers. So if you're building a model where you're going to show just one decimal place across the board, show one decimal place across the board. You'll often see per share data. Per share data is almost always expressed in two decimal places, like EPS, $2.16, as you see here. Share price, 2 cents, 2 decimal places. But where the operating results are either 1 decimal place, no decimal place, 3 decimal places, there's a lot of conventions. The key is to maintain consistency. You absolutely want to maintain consistency. Negative numbers are virtually always represented as parentheses as opposed to negative numbers. And the other important thing is, to the extent that this is at all possible, you always want to maintain standard column spacing. You want to maintain column header types that are standard. You want similar row header spacing. Everything should be spaced out consistently. And again, you can really use Excel to your advantage here. So if you want to, in one fell swoop, change the width of all the columns, Alt-OCW would change the width from 8.43 if you want to change it to 12. You can just always ensure you don't have to do this with a mouse. Alt-OCW will get it all the same. And the same thing goes for rows. Shift spacebar, scroll down. And if I want to do the same thing for rows, Alt-O-R-E. And I can change the row height to 12.